This week on the Communicators, a one-hour interview with Sanjeev Ahuja, the CEO of LightSquared, a company that's trying to build a wireless broadband network across the U.S. Mr. Ahuja discusses the science, engineering, costs, and political challenges of building the network, as well as concerns that LightSquared's technology may interfere with GPS global positioning equipment.
Sanjeev Ahuja is the chairman and CEO of a company called LightSquared. Mr. Ahuja, what is LightSquared and what do you do?
Peter, thanks for inviting me to the show. Cecilia, thank you very much for being here, and good morning to both of you. What LightSquared is trying to do is build a nationwide terrestrial broadband network working with our satellite. That will enable Americans coast to coast for the first time. Every square inch of American soil will be able to be connected, whether it's Hawaii, Alaska, California, Maine, to Florida. If you can look at the American sky, you can talk on a phone. And for the first time, Americans will have access to connectivity even if there are natural disasters and other things happening through our satellite network. Now, we're building a terrestrial network, which is going to be the most comprehensive network using fourth generation technology built to date. But complemented with the satellite we launched last year, it is the largest commercial satellite ever. So whether you're in Yellowstone National Park, Grand Canyon, or Appalachian Trail, you're connected.
Are you operational right now?
No, we are not operational yet. Our satellite is operational. We are in the process of moving customers over to the satellite. Our terrestrial network is not operational.
Who are your customers?
Our customers are retailers. So we don't go directly to the consumer. We go to other companies that take our service and offer it to the consumers. To date, we have signed 17 customers. So think of it from a consumer's perspective. These 17 companies, when we are operational, can offer nationwide broadband wireless connectivity to American consumers. So today, when you look for a nationwide service, you have 3, maybe 4 choices. We have enabled 17 companies to get into that business. Now, part of those are national carriers today. Sprint, for instance,
is a customer of LightSquared.
Sprint is a customer. Also Cricket Communications, which has a substantive coverage in the country. But 15 other companies, we made them, enabled them to be national carriers because they are reselling our service to American consumer. Now that is something that has never happened anywhere in the world, not just the United States, anywhere in the world, that we really gave so many more choices to the consumers. Instead of having very limited few choices you have. Today, 12.5, we expect that number could be as high as close to 100. More competition, more choices, lower prices.
So, Mr. Ahuja, your competitors would be the Verizons and the AT&Ts and the Comcasts?
We actually look at these as our either current partners, as I mentioned, Sprint is, or our potential partners. Because what we are providing to them is wireless broadband capacity. So whether it's AT&T, Verizon, or Comcast, and take AT&T or Verizon specifically, if they need capacity in New York or Washington, how many times do your calls drop today? How many times does your data connection drop today? It is because there's congestion in the network. There's capacity shortage. We can supplement that capacity for either AT&T, Verizon, all of them. So we look at these companies either as our current customers or as our potential customers. Because what the industry is lacking is capacity. A few years ago when we started building the plan for this business, we were anticipating the industry will grow 30, 40 times the data demand in the industry over the next 6, 7 years. Today I look at it, it'll grow more than 50 times in the next 4 years. And I think if we look at it 6 months or a year from now, our forecast would be even faster than that. So the demand is growing much faster than anybody anticipated. Supply is limited, and we believe that we help augment that supply very significantly. So all of these companies are our either current partners or our potential partners.
Mr. Ahuja, recently LightSquared took out full-page ads in several major publications, including the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, etc. And in that ad, you wrote, recently concerns have been raised about interference with the LightSquared product with GPS devices. What are those concerns and who raised them?
Okay. Let me just step back and walk you through the history of LightSquared and the spectrum that we are using today. This company, its predecessor, was formed in 1980s, and the spectrum was allocated in 1989. That's the time when there was no auction and companies were going and getting the spectrum as and when they needed them. And a lot of the current large wireless operators came in existence at the time. This spectrum was originally allocated for satellite purpose. It worked through in early 2000, 2001, 2003, 2005, under Republican administrations, getting permissions from the FCC to build a terrestrial network working in conjunction with the satellite network. That time, GPS Industry Council, GPS manufacturers, participated in the process and supported the process. And they made comments on our network design. We talked about how we would live as good neighbors because GPS spectrum's next door to the LightSquared spectrum. We defined rules that LightSquared will not transmit into the GPS spectrum. That required us to make investment, that we would build a big wall on our side that we wouldn't transmit over. In 2010, when we were asking for a change of control, when we acquired the predecessor company to LightSquared called Skyterra, the FCC mandated us to build a network at the rate no company in the history of the United States, no telecom company, has ever been required to. We are required and mandated by the FCC to cover 260 million Americans through our terrestrial network by end of 2015. A very aggressive investment schedule and very, very aggressive build-out schedule. So it's technically a big challenge. But we stepped up to it. We were excited because we really believe it is a great opportunity and you get to serve the American people that are being charged more tariffs than people in other parts of the world, that are getting network quality that leaves a lot to be desired. And we see it as the data demand is not getting filled properly. We saw it as a good opportunity, so we accepted those conditions. In fall of 2010, we went to the FCC and asked for a change in the kind of device we would have. Now, the devices we were building until that time would have both satellite and terrestrial coverage. One of our large customers said that can they offer a service where you have a device that is terrestrial only, as well as a device that is both terrestrial and satellite. And they essentially wanted to say, we'll do a peace of mind offer to our customers and say, we'll connect you to the satellite, but most of the time to just a terrestrial network. At that time, GPS Industry Council stepped up and said, oops, we're concerned because you're adjacent to our network. Now, the issue was not what we were transmitting into the GPS spectrum. Issue was GPS devices looking over into our spectrum. Now, what happened was we were building a network which was one adjacent to the GPS. We actually moved down to the lower part of the spectrum. So we are very far away. So it's like you're constructing a building. We have a piece of land and the GPS guys have a piece of land. And they say, well, if you built close to us, this is, since we are looking into it, we have trees falling into it, don't build it close. So we went farthest away from that spectrum. And that actually alleviated, we have around 400 million GPS devices in this country. Your cell phones, your personal navigation devices in your cars, most of those problems went away. The cell phones aren't affected, personal navigational devices aren't affected when we move to the other end of the spectrum. There is, out of 400 million, around 500,000 devices, the number is somewhere between 3 to 700,000, around 500,000 devices that are used for 3 specific applications: agriculture, large tractors, construction, and surveying, that were impacted by us being in that part of the spectrum. And we have always believed, and I believe very passionately, that this is an engineering problem that good engineers can solve interference. I've been in this business over 30 years. I've built wireless networks in 36 countries. I've had interference every single time I've tried to build a network. I've built them from India to Bangladesh to Kenya to Uganda to Rwanda to Tanzania to United States. Every time you build a network, there's interference. And the way you resolve interference is through engineering. And last time we met Cecilia, I said this is an engineering challenge, and we have resolved that. And now, last week what we announced was a device that helps solve the problem for agricultural devices, surveying, and construction devices. So we can now live harmoniously with our neighbors in GPS and have both networks up, because ultimately the goal is, and the objective is, how does the American consumer, how do you, how do I, how do our friends, our family gain from the LightSquared network? It is not about one or the other. It is about both living harmoniously. And if you put a technical challenge to American engineers, they can solve it. I've confidently believed that, and I believe it today because we have demonstrated it, that they can solve these engineering challenges. So now we are in a situation that here is a proof that it can be done. Now let's work harmoniously. Let's work at a plan to replace or refit these devices that are out there so that the farmers aren't hurt, because farmers are asking. You go to Kansas, a farmer says, yes, I need a precision navigational device, but I also want broadband. I want my children to do their homework while they're connected to the internet. They don't say, give me this or that. They say, give me both. And that's our responsibility.
Sanjeev Ahuja is the chairman and CEO of LightSquared, and Cecilia Kong is our guest reporter. She's with the Washington Post.
Hi. Even if there is an engineering solution, a technical solution to these interference problems, and you'll have to do more testing of some portion of those devices, of course, the federal government has asked of that, the NTIA and the FCC. What about the costs? I know you have committed at LightSquared more than $100 million, is that right, to defray some of these costs that would have cost for some of these solutions, the filters and the antennas and et cetera. The federal government, I believe, the General Shelton has even mentioned, other federal government officials, that it could be in the billions of dollars that the federal government would have to incur. There's a big discrepancy in the dollar figures here, though, than in the cost of how to resolve this technical problem.
Right.
How can you talk about that and what that does then for sort of the future? Can that gap, if you try to live harmoniously, if you have such a huge gulf of dollar figures, how can you get someplace in the middle?
Cecilia, a few months ago we were hearing that it would take 10 years to solve this problem technically. It took us less than 10 weeks to demonstrate that the problem can be solved. So it is not as hard as what some of the people might have believed. Our estimate is that the federal government has somewhere between 30,000 to 50,000 of these precision receivers. We have offered to the federal government $50 million worth of either replacement, refitting, or refurbishment of existing precision receivers that the federal government uses. We believe that is sufficient amount of money to replace most of the receivers or fix most of the receivers that are out there. We obviously don't have precise numbers or data out of federal government to see how many receivers that they have today. When I think about our Department of Defense systems, I have absolute confidence that these are resilient systems, that these are the systems that can handle transmissions, not just from L-band, but hopefully even within the GPS band. Because you go on eBay today and you can get a quote GPS jammer for $20, right? So I am confident we are building defense systems that can handle things you can buy off the shelf at an electronics shop or off the eBay today that are transmitting within the GPS frequency. And we are so far from the GPS frequency. I think once we go through the testing at that frequency, we haven't gone through the testing yet. So some of the information that you might hear might be based on old information. I think once the new testing happens, I am absolutely confident that we in this country have robust and resilient DoD systems. As an American citizen, I want to make sure that our defenses are resilient to $20 GPS jammers.
Though I will say, I believe some of these federal officials are concerned that the American people would have to incur the costs that would be beyond what you're willing to commit. And why should the federal government is the question. And in fact, I believe Senator Grassley will send a letter, is sending a letter today asking the FCC and your company of the costs that this would incur to the federal government and to taxpayers. I mean, I think that's the concern is why should a private company, why should Americans take over the costs of resolving a problem for a private company?
So let's just think about it. I'm not aware of Senator Grassley's letter, so I can't speak to what the letter might say. Okay. And what I can speak to is, look, we have made what we think is a very adequate offer for the federal government. It's a $300 solution per device to put this filter on those devices that precision can work properly with them. And I think it takes care of most, if not all, of the federal devices that we are aware of. Now, if there are more, information hasn't been shared. Now, let's talk about consumer devices. I think that's, and if we look at consumer devices, since 2001, 2002, 2003, 2005, some of these commercial device manufacturers, all of them have been aware that there is going to be a terrestrial network in this spectrum.
But did they believe that they would be terrestrial-only devices on the network?
No, actually, the devices really have nothing to do with the interference, Cecilia. The interference is all about what we transmit out of our base stations. Okay. Devices have no physical impact on GPS because every one of the devices that we have in our network, we expect them to be GPS enabled. So it really has nothing to do with the devices. It is all about what we transmit out of our base station. And that information has been there. Some of the public filings of the GPS manufacturers talk about this happening and the impact that would potentially have on their business. So, and adding this capability and this resilience to the device would have cost a few cents if it was done properly at that time. Now, building devices over several years that aren't conformant to how good neighbors ought to be living is fairly disappointing. And I think, if that's the situation we are in. And I would say that if I'm buying a product that the manufacturer of the product, if I look at it my personal vantage point, manufacturer of the product knew very well that there's a potential network coming in the neighborhood of that because it's been allocated, it has been allowed. FCC has specifically specified the specifications of how that network would look like. I would make sure the devices that I make work. And actually, Cecilia, 400 plus million of those devices work fine. Your iPhone,
Yeah. It's
your
the precision
Blackberries,
devices.
your personal navigation systems, they all work okay. But I think, in the context of this, you have to look at what do Americans want. When I look around the country, they want broadband, just like they want their GPS. When I go to and talk to farmers in Kansas, they're saying, don't give me precision GPS or broadband. They're saying, give me both. You talked about Tanzania just before we started this. Let me give you an example. I was talking to a friend of mine. She was an hour and a half away from any city in Tanzania, and she had 5 bars on her phone. And she was visiting her parents, hour and a half away from Atlanta, Georgia, and she has 0 bars on her phone. And in that town, in Atlanta, outside Atlanta, in Georgia, the residents of that town, every afternoon, one of them drives with their Blackberries and iPhones to go download emails. Once a day, it's like the days of fetching water. That's what Americans are asking for. They're saying, give us both. And we have a solution that gives them both.
Without a doubt, your plan, your business plan, is completely parallel in lockstep with what this government wants in terms of broadband. The Obama administration, the FCC with its National Broadband Plan, are calling for this. You mentioned earlier that the FCC mandated you to do the biggest terrestrial broadband outreach ever, covering 260 million people. In retrospect, it's been a tough few months for LightSquared in terms of a lot of the politics around the process in which your company was sort of off the ground and the regulatory, with the regulatory process as well. Do you, in retrospect, do you wish that maybe, or do you think that the FCC could have cast a broader and bigger process? Meaning, do you think that it merited a full commission vote, aside from for the 2010 license transfer you're referring to, the 2011 waiver? Do you think that these things that happened, and some would say fast, I know you guys don't say that it wasn't fast, but do you think it merited more attention given the weight of this project and how it was mandated as the biggest project ever for the FCC, as you said? Should it have been up for all 5 commissioners to look at?
Cecilia, let's go back to 2006. This company could have started building a network in 2005.
But there was no
2006.
mandate for 260 million.
No, but the network build
users
out,
to be covered.
it had the authorization to build out the network in 2005. Okay, so the network build out, the company didn't have the financial capability to do it. So let's, for a minute, ignore 2010. You could go down back to 2005 when we had a Republican administration. The company had authorization to build the network. So if it had financial wherewithal, she would have had the network operational for several years already. Okay, it probably wouldn't have built at the pace that we are planning to build and we are being asked to build, but the network would have been there. So it is not a question of what happened in 2010 or 2011. This is, you have to go back to 2003 and 2005 processes. Obviously, we believe that the FCC processes, they've gone through full NTIA, FCC process with the government agencies participating, industry participating. All of that process happened before the change of control. Sure. But I think it's more important to say, okay, what happened in 2005, what happened in 2003, because when we acquired the company in 2010, we acquired it on the basis of what authorization it had in 2005. And then we moved on to change of control in 2010.
So I guess I'm asking, though, do you wish that there was more of a thorough process that was brought up to the level of all 5 commissioners? If that were the case, regardless of what happened in 2005, today, because it's such an important network, it's such an important plan to both the FCC and, of course, potentially to the country, that maybe you wouldn't be in the situation today of all these concerns about new testing and new solutions and not, and the politics around and the hearings from Capitol Hill. In retrospect, do you think that, yes, there might have been a process that started in 2005, but nobody really thought that there'd be LTE, this sort of LTE solution, in 2010 today, and the grand sort of the reach of it? Specifically, do you
Cecilia,
wish that
the process was very robust. It had participation from Department of Commerce, NTIA. It had support and review and participation by all industry players at the time of change of control. That process took several months. So it was not done in a week or two or a month or two. It took several months of FCC process. Now, it is disappointing that some of the people that have concerns today didn't think about those in 2003, 2005, and second half of 2009 as the process was going on. We have been asked to do the most extensive testing. I'm comfortable doing that testing. Interference issues are engineering issues. We should let engineers solve those. And they're working on solving those. They have solved most of the issues and put behind those issues behind us. Now the question is, what happens when the network gets out there? It is not anymore that technically it can't be done. We have worked through technical challenges. I've been saying for months now that these are technical and engineering issues that should be solved and dealt with by engineers. I have had, and continue to have, absolute confidence in the engineering capabilities in this country. I was trained as an engineer in the United States. I know how good the talent is. As I said, I've solved interference issues since the early days of the wireless industry.
Now, Mr. Ahuja, though, in a sense, and you tell me if this is wrong, but it sounds in a sense that you're saying, trust me, to the American public, to the FAA, to the FCC. Is that?
I think what I'm saying is trust the American engineers. Trust the American ingenuity. When we could put a man on the moon, our engineers designed the systems to do it. When for the last 20 years from the first network on, we have solved interference issues. They have solved this one. It is not, what I'm saying is, it is solved. It is our solutions out there today. We announced it last week that how can you solve precision engineering issues? But I'm also saying, Americans are saying, cut my tariffs. Give me broadband coverage. Have my children provide access to them over the internet. Give me a network that works inside buildings. Americans are asking for all of that. And I'm saying, let's trust the American engineers to provide all of it.
Cecilia Kong, time for one more question.
Well, what next? Are you going to meet your deadlines? Are you going to meet the timeline that you wanted, given this new testing mandate from the NTIA and the FCC? What's next? If I was an investor, I'd be thinking, wow, the FAA saying hundreds could be killed, and this is a public safety problem. What next?
Cecilia, we're working very hard on ensuring we deliver on FCC's mandate to us to build the network on the schedule. I would say that not only we are confident of making those commitments, we think we will cover 260 million Americans by the end of 2014, a year ahead of FCC's mandate to us. And we're able to do it because of a first time in the industry, the kind of relationship we have done, first time anywhere in the world, the relationship we have now created with Sprint. And think about end of next year, second half of next year when we launch our network. And I'll give you an example, which is what I get excited about as a consumer, my family gets excited about, my friends get excited about. Today, if you wanted an unlimited data, text, and voice offer on your cellular phone, go there. You can get a package anywhere from $59.99 to $105. That would use less than 1 gigabyte of data a month, because that's what you generally use on your smartphone. To our retail partners, that 1 gigabyte of data, we will charge them $6. Think of the benefit. Let's say our retail partner doubles it, quadruples it, because they have to pay for distribution, they have to pay for this. American consumer saves $50, $60 a month. That's $600 in the pockets of Americans. It's $14 billion of investment in the US infrastructure at a time when we are not only behind, we're getting further behind in the broadband infrastructure. We are number 17 in the world today, 17, comparable to Malta in terms of broadband connectivity, and slipping. It is 15,000 new technology jobs every year for the next 5 years. When we are hurting due to unemployment, it's every single penny of our investment is private money. $14 billion over the next 8 years.
And we're going to have to leave it there. Sanjeev Ahuja is the chairman and CEO of LightSquared. LightSquared.com if you'd like more information or to see their full-page ad. Cecilia Kong, tech reporter with the Washington Post. And this is the Communicators program, and this is the second half of our interview with Sanjeev Ahuja, who is chairman and CEO of LightSquared. Cecilia Kong is our guest reporter. Cecilia Kong.
Mr. Ahuja, you are right now at the subject, as well as the regulatory agency, the Federal Communications Commission, of at least 2 investigations by people, to lawmakers on Capitol Hill. There's a lot of question as to whether relationships that the companies had with the White House and meetings with the FCC, a fast process, some would say, at the FCC for getting the approvals you needed to get your network up and running. You've defended yourself in full-page ads, as Peter mentioned. Why do you feel, what's wrong here? Why are you misunderstood in your mind, and why? Can you explain?
Cecilia, LightSquared has gone through, in my recollection, probably the most extensive regulatory process I've seen anywhere in the world. The spectrum has been going through a process for 8 years now. And I'm an engineer, I'm an entrepreneur. I have built businesses, I've built businesses. Telecommunication is my passion. I came back to the United States after having worked in Europe for almost 7 years, because I saw a need for American consumers. When I used to come back, visit my children here, and they were going to school and college, I would look at their bills. I would look at the network quality. It was no better than how I left it in early 2000. When we could build networks in Europe that could penetrate through 2 walls and a moving elevator, and we were offering tariffs in Europe that were 30% lower than a bill of an average American, and coverage that when I went 20 minutes outside New York City to visit my son in Philadelphia, that a phone would not work, I felt that there was an opportunity, a need to, 1, build the networks, provide prices at a rate that Americans truly deserved. I'll give you an example, Cecilia. This is where I have another business where we build broadband, wireless in emerging markets. We offer in Bangladesh $14 a month, unlimited wireless data. How many Americans get that? 0. That hurts me. That hurts me as an entrepreneur. It hurts me as an engineer. But that's also an opportunity. On the basis of that opportunity, we have raised billions of dollars and invested them. We have created the world's most sophisticated satellite system, built by Boeing engineers. We launched it, and it's working today. It is the largest commercial satellite ever built anywhere. We believed that it could be done, and it has been done by American engineers.
So no doubt of the potential, the story that you're talking about, the potential that the government as well, the Obama administration, the FCC, would like to see realized at some point. But we have a reality today where there have been tests that you've done as well as the GPS industry that shows interference problems. You've come up with a solution that requires more testing, of course. Who needed early on in the process, what engineering minds, the great American engineers that you talked about, from where? The federal government, the FCC, the NTIA, or the private sector? Who need to speak up early and say, this is a potential problem if 260 million people are going to be covered in this massive network with devices that could potentially interfere? Why was there, when we have all these experts and these great American engineers, why wasn't there a very loud, clear voice, particularly from the federal government? And who should have sounded off that alarm early?
I think federal government, but more than that, let's talk about the history of this, as I said, because that's really important. The primary authorization to build the network happened in 2003, followed by that in 2005, where all the related players, not just the government, but all the GPS manufacturers through GPS Industry Council and others participated in the process and supported it. This is when you go through a planning board. Your neighbors participate in most of the towns. And you expect that neighbors would expect that since planning board approves your application, that there would be a building to be constructed here. And they would ensure that they're not encroaching on your building. They're not encroaching on your piece of land, your property. In 2010, and the company did not have the financial resources. So I think this issue really should have been brought up back in early 2000.
By
so when
whom?
By the players, by the folks in the GPS industry, to say, look, if you build a network here, we have devices that will never be able to deal with it. And actually, in their defense, they did ask us not to transmit any power over to the GPS spectrum. Mm-hmm. And at that time, we started investing millions of dollars, around $10 million were invested in building a very thick wall, mm-hmm. which said we would not transmit any power over to the GPS. And you would expect that GPS guys would build devices that would be able to handle it. Now, let's just take a couple steps forward. Actually, in 2008, Department of Defense and others put specifications out and said that there would be a network that could be built up here in this frequency band, so our GPS devices ought to be resilient to that network. So that's why...
So in 2008, they warned GPS, in other words.
No, actually, Department of Defense for themselves. For themselves, for their acquisition and other things. And if you go back, we have moved away from the GPS spectrum. So when people talk about some of the interference challenges, they're still referring to our old plan. When I said we were building a network close to the GPS spectrum. Now we are further away. And as I said, the issues related to precision devices, we have announced a solution last week. And amazingly, we have had half a dozen or so GPS manufacturers approach us and say, we can build devices that can live harmoniously with LightSquared. So we're working with many of them, and you'll see many more devices.
Now, Mr. Ahuja, what about the FAA's concerns, though? Have those been addressed with your new plan?
We are working closely with FAA. I think where our spectrum is, I don't see any aviation safety issues.
Were you taken by surprise by the FAA's raising of these issues?
Look, the issues were understood once the testing happened, okay? Yes, we were surprised that there were devices out there that should have been building properly since 2003, 2005, and for almost a decade, they hadn't been designed to deal with the network build-out. Yes, that was a surprise to us.
And is that what you mean when in your full-page ad when you say that despite the fact that the interference is caused by others' inappropriate use of LightSquared's licensed spectrum?
Look, this is all spectrum users use the spectrum just like the land you have to build a network in their spectrum. We committed not to transmit over to GPS. Interestingly, these GPS devices look way into the LightSquared spectrum to perform the service.
So it's the GPS users who have
It's
been
the
inappropriate.
Some GPS devices, look, your cell phones and others work absolutely fine. Your personal navigational system in your cars work absolutely fine with the plan we have proposed. You're not going to get lost. Some GPS devices, actually of the precision receivers that we tested, almost a fourth of those receivers work absolutely fine as well. They're by the large precision manufacturers. Not only that, this is now, as I said, we have half a dozen GPS manufacturers, whether they're chipset guys or GPS equipment manufacturers, saying we can build devices that will work harmoniously with LightSquared.
But when it comes to the FAA, the pilots union has said that the next generation, of course, of FAA control is going to be GPS based. Mm-hmm. So is their use of the GPS still into your spectrum? Is that their concern? Is that how you see it?
What I can speak to is the FAA concerns primarily related to our old spectrum. There are discussions on how we build the network in the new spectrum that we have proposed, which is farther away from that. And we're working with FAA to ensure that the power levels, the construction of the network and design of the network is in a way that should absolutely not have any safety issues. I fly as much as anybody. And not only that, look, what we are building is a business that helps Americans, helps American consumer. It has to be a system that leaves no personal safety issues of any kind on the table. All of those issues we don't believe exist, and the network we built should have absolutely no personal safety issues at all of any kind. What this is about is serving American people in the way they deserve it. And it's about opportunity in this country. It's not just the economic opportunity for LightSquared and its investors and its employees and the suppliers to it. It is an opportunity for entrepreneurs. It is an opportunity for a college graduate sitting in Missouri and says, I have created a new game that can run on internet. Can I get access to the broadband wireless network to take that game to the market? Because if he or she wanted to do it today, the cost of entry would be $2 or $3 million to work with one of the large wireless operators. They can do it with LightSquared for $0. We keep our test center open to all of these entrepreneurs to come and test their devices, test their applications, test their games, test agricultural applications, to the most advanced business-to-business applications, so that they can deliver that. So when you talk of economic opportunity, it's not just about LightSquared. It's economic opportunity for regular engineers, people like my children, people like your children, our friends, our relatives. That's what this is about.
Mr. Ahuja, do you think that the Verizons, the AT&Ts, the Comcasts are trying to squeeze? Do you think maybe some of the recent noise about LightSquared has been raised by some of the larger established wireless companies?
Look, Peter, as I explained to you, we are building a network which is wholesale only. This industry has a business model which is completely vertically integrated. Wireless operators do everything. They give you the network, they build the network, they operate the network, they manage the network, they have retail stores, they go to the customers, they provide service to the customer. And they decide for you what applications and services you can run on their network. For instance, can you run voice over IP? No, you can't. Okay? Ours is an absolutely open network. We encourage people to run voice over IP on our network. We encourage you to run video. And we charge at the rates that we think your tariffs ought to, your prices as a consumer, what hurts your and my pocketbook every month should drop $30, $40, $50, $70 a month. That's straight money in your pocket. So anytime you try to do a disruption in an industry, established players are uncomfortable because you're challenging the existing business model. But that's expected. But the way our model is, as I said, if they are not our customers today, I want them to be our future customers. So we look at them as partners in this business, either now or in the future. Sprint is a partner, and we value that relationship. I expect AT&T Verizon would be partners. Comcast would be a partner. But end of the day, when we get our service operational, 330 million Americans gain. They gain in their pocketbook. They get better quality network. They get not one or two more choices. They get tens of new choices, obviously driving superior network and lower prices for them. That's the benefit. And people in this country for the first time are connected coast to coast.
Sanjeev Ahuja is our guest on the Communicators. He is the chairman and CEO of LightSquared. Cecilia Kong is the tech reporter with the Washington Post.
Actually, I'd like to go back to Peter's question. Can you explain that a little bit more? Because it sounds like you're saying that yes, competition is the competitors are afraid and they'll be challenged. And Philip Falcone, the chairman of Harbinger Capital, your lead investor, said in an interview recently on Fox News that he believes competition might be behind this. So what's going on? There's a very expensive, from the outside, there's a very expensive political battle going on. Full page ads, lots of lobbying going on. There's so much around, you don't even have a network up yet. Like, what is the battle going on? Can you tease that out a little bit? When you talk about competitors feeling challenged, who do you think is being challenged, and how is this being played out? Just for observers who are really concerned about this issue, and a lot of people have big questions. Why is a private company that has these big aspirations in this situation in the first place? So, if you can just explain.
Cecilia, when you do a disruptive business model, it has to make the incumbents uncomfortable. When you talk of an environment where you can serve American consumers and have them pay prices that are dramatically lower than what they pay today, the industry as it exists today gets challenged. But I believe in fair competition. I have built my career over fair competition around the globe. I believe in America's commitment to free and open market. I believe that this country of ours encourages risk-taking, private investment, entrepreneurship. And I believe that anytime you try to build a new business, you expect competitive pressures. So I'm good competing with the competitors on a free, fair, and open ground. I have no concerns with that. And we are very comfortable, but our model is, it really doesn't compete with what exists out there. The market has a need that the current operators cannot satisfy. They don't have enough capacity. We are at LightSquared are trying to fill that capacity gap. I think eventually the biggest gainers of this will not just be the existing operators because they won't have capacity to serve their customers. As they're running out of capacity over the next 2, 3, 4 years, as early as 2 years, most of them will run out of capacity. Look at the new tablets that are getting out there, new devices that are getting out there. Our appetite as consumers in this country to consume wireless broadband data is insatiable. You saw what Kindle announced. Wait for the new iPhone. Look at these devices as the first generation devices. This is like your old Commodore PC on your desk 30 years ago. So when you go out, the data you will consume, so the companies that may feel that they are under competitive threat from somebody who's as disruptive as LightSquared, I think eventually they will come around and say, you know what, we do need their capacity. And they would want to be our partners. That's what we want to be. And we have approached them. We're trying to work with every single one of the operators in this country to say, look, we can help supplement and complement your network where you have congestion today and where you expect that you will not have enough capacity, so that they can serve the American consumer better. Obviously, we will serve American consumers through tens of these kind of companies.
There are, though, concerns when you talk about a level playing field, that LightSquared as a private company did not play on a level playing field, that perhaps there was influence or special favors granted by connections within the White House through requests to the FCC of an expedited process and the inclusion of a particular portion of their national broadband plan that really applies to your business, using the L-band satellite for terrestrial use. Can you please address those concerns about this not being a level playing field for a private company? Because, you talk a lot about the consumer being the biggest beneficiary, but LightSquared is a business. You're going to benefit in the billions as well.
Cecilia, the process that is really relevant here is 2003 and 2005 process. 2010 was the change of control was a very long, several months long process. Okay. I don't know how it could have been a longer and a more detailed or a more comprehensive process. This is as comprehensive a process I've seen anywhere, globally, on any spectrum change of control issue or any company's change of control. So we went through a very extensive process, and that required us to commit $14 billion of investment, private investment, which we had to go out and raise substantive amount of that money from private investors to invest in the US infrastructure. So we had to go and convince the investors, several of them, that this is a good opportunity. It benefits American consumer, but it also obviously has to be a good economic opportunity, that we could gather them to invest into this company. But they have invested. Over the last year, we have raised from several investors over $2.5 billion for this company since the acquisition of that. And that has been done on the premise of 2005, 2003, 2010 FCC specific authorizations that have evolved from 2003 to 2005 primarily. And now the challenge is for us is to raise the rest of the capital that we can go build the network at the rate FCC has mandated us. I'll tell you how we see it and how I personally feel it. It is a battle in some ways, and you stated it. It is about LightSquared versus very large established players in some ways, because we are disrupting the business model. It is about companies that are worth hundreds of billions of dollars with 100-year history and longer. It's about changing an industry that is to make it radically different, to provide more choices to the customers. People ask me, how do I feel about a David and Goliath situation I said, I feel fortunate if I were the size of David relative to some of these Goliaths. But you know what? In this country, and that's the foundation of us, is fair competitive process. We are trying to go through not a one specific incident of the process, it's an 8-year process. And I think that's where, if you really step back and look at it, this is an 8-year process. Each step of the process has been a very long, very detailed, comprehensive process.
I wonder, though, at this stage, if how much of a David you are, in the sense that if you, with the waiver, and I think your own economic analysis by the Brattle Group might have supported this. Please clarify if I'm wrong. That essentially, with that waiver of the ancillary terrestrial component, your plans to build out this terrestrial network, you're taking spectrum, and spectrum is so valuable that you didn't pay for in the first place, but it converts, but clarify that, please. But you make it exponentially more valuable, and you're trying to raise capital to build it out, but could you at some point, okay, forget I said that other part, then, okay, because obviously it seems like it's wrong about you not paying money, but you've made it exponentially more valuable through this regulatory process, and the question is, what happens if you don't raise the capital to actually build this thing? Could you sell it for the spectrum for a lot more money?
Cecilia.
Do I have it totally wrong, please?
With all due respect, if I may, I think there are several misperceptions in what you just narrated. So let me just point out and highlight a few of those, if I may respectfully do so. The spectrum was given to this company in 1989, 4 or 5 predecessors ago, as a part of American mobile satellite system. At that time, there were no auctions of spectrum in the United States. The ATC rules that were established in 2001, 2003, and the authorization to build the ATC network was given in 2005. Okay? So if there was an economic gain for this business that happened 6, 7, 8 years ago. But it was a long process the company went through. But that time, the company did not have economic wherewithal to build a terrestrial network. But it had the authorization to do it. If you go back to 2005 filings of the predecessor company of LightSquared, Skyterra, it is openly stated that the company has authorization to build tens of thousands of base stations. FCC authorization of 2003 and 2005 clearly states that the company has authorization to build the network. And you know what? One part, you're absolutely right. We saw that as an economic opportunity when we tried to acquire the company. And when we acquired it in 2010, but it was based on the authorization company had in 2005. So
like the ATC.
The ATC rules were established in 2005. So you're absolutely right. This is about entrepreneurship. It is about seeing opportunities where others don't see them. We saw the opportunity in 2009 based on 2005 rules that the company had authorization in. I would respectfully, you asked me if I would say, go look at the company's filings of 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009. The authorization existed since that time to go build a terrestrial network, an ATC network. And it was a public company at the time. Others weren't seeing the opportunity, and fortunately we did. That's why we acquired the company. So it was not an instantaneous transformation of the spectrum. It was almost a decade-long process. I think in this country, one of the fundamental foundations is seeing the economic opportunity. And this economic opportunity also serves the American consumers better. It has a positive, very positive $600, $700, $800 addition to every American's pocket every year. That's what this is about.
30 seconds for a question and an answer.
How would you respond to questions raised by this very extensive report by the Center of Public Integrity that emails were exchanged between White House officials and LightSquared officials to get meetings with White House personnel at the time when you're donating to campaigns, the company officials were?
Cecilia, when you're building a significant network and when you're making a significant technology investment in a country, and you look at whether they're telecom operators, technology companies, you pick up the newspaper, open it, they're CEOs of all of these companies meeting with various government officials. As I said, I have businesses in 30 countries over my career. You go meet with different government officials all the time. And especially when you're making a significant contribution that we really very firmly believe to help American consumer, to reduce their prices, provide a better network, that needs to be communicated to everybody in the country. And that's what we are communicating through our advertisements. That's what I'm trying to communicate to you. That's what I'm trying to communicate to the audience. And everybody here, that look at not only direct opportunity that we are creating, 15,000 new jobs. Think about induced the jobs and opportunities that are created by the existence of this network. They are many-fold more. It's not just the $600, $700, $800 you get more in your pocket a year. It is you can spend that money and create more employment. In a country where we are facing over 9% unemployment, when you invest $14 billion in the infrastructure, it is not just the impact of that company. It is in itself, it is everything around it, is that economic opportunity. I'd love to have that opportunity to share that with every single person in this country. That's what we're about.
Sanjeev Ahuja is the chairman of LightSquared. He's also the CEO. Cecilia Kong, technology policy reporter for the Washington Post. This has been C-SPAN's Communicators.